Sammy,
Josie.
I haven't talked to you in so long. It's been so long.
It's like I've been in a desert just searching for Josiah. Like, I don't even need water to survive. I just need your quips, your takes, your covers, your wisdom, your puns.
Well, Sammy, I've got none of those things for you today.
Damn, I'm dying. I'm going to die in this desert then.
Today is all about, as you might expect from a Blink-182 podcast.
Yeah.
The concept of nursing and the depictions of nurses in the media.
Well, this is... I'm not surprised, and this is what I would expect from a Blink-182 podcast, because we've talked, a few times about the origin of this concept of you and I sort of embarking on this journey together, but we've always kind of skated around the fact that you and I actually met at a nursing conference, that our true passion has always been the act of nursing.
Well, also, often the way that I picture the podcast is when I'm playing you covers, it's like I'm nursing you or breastfeeding you. With the covers.
And I often, when I'm sort of full 420 over here and sort of allowing myself, when we're in the fourth hour of covers and I'm sort of lapsing into sort of a meditative state, I often picture myself, quite small, like an infant once again, just gently suckling at your teat. So it's interesting to know that that's happening on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it's really teat season right now. Okay, well, here's what happened. I was looking around for a decently sized cover, like JPEG of the Enema of the State cover, because it's sometimes actually kind of hard to find with big albums. It's really weird. Like newer albums, you can always find a good 1,000 pixels, baby.
Right, but before every album was primarily released digitally, you find something and you're like, wait, this is sort of a weird scan.
Yeah, or the biggest image is like an eBay photo with the plastic on it still, or I don't know. So anyways, luckily I found it, but then I stumbled across truthaboutnursing.org. And I've just sent you the URL here. Now,
is this one of those websites, because I don't have a ton of friends that have kids, but I have a few friends that have kids. And one of the things that I think is quite a hot topic, a little bit of a zoomies in the parenting community, in the nursing community, is the subject of nursing. Because I guess there's there's warring factions in, the world of breastfeeding. And so
so you're still on breast.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually another meaning of the term nursing, which is means being a nurse in a hospital or a doctor's
that's
office.
so interesting.
So that doesn't mean that you are a boob. You are an actual nurse.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. And so is this is this one of your weird DeviantArt fringe internet communities?
Let me get to the juice here. So I found this article on truthaboutnursing.org.
Yeah.
And I've sent it to you here. It's a surprisingly well written critique of the band that also critiques their depiction of nurses in the media. So this website is all about, they're like an advocacy group, and it's actually very interesting because the way that they argue is that the way that nurses are portrayed in the media will affect sort of the ways that nurses are given funding or the ways that nurses are treated by their, what is the word of someone who's treated by a nurse? Patient?
Yeah, they're victims.
And so, yeah. Well, actually, the victim thing is another major problem in the nursing community. So you'll find out all about that in a second, but I wanted to show you this review. Everyone should read this review, but first of all, I want to just point out in the intro. So this was written by Harry Summers, and his wife Sandy Summers is the nursing editor. So Harry has given it 2 stars, and Sandy has given it half a star for a nursing rating.
Right.
Because
so like a standard sort of website review, it's got the title, you've got the photo, there's a little bit of a rating guide, 4 stars is good, 1 star is poor, lists the record label, and then, literally before the review starts, nursing rating, half a star, artistic rating, 2 stars.
So the first paragraph, I think, is worth reading aloud. The title of this punk by numbers pop band's 1999 release, which sold over 4 million copies, is both misleading and revealing. It's deceptive in suggesting that the band has much to say about healthcare or politics beyond a perfunctory stab at extraterrestrial paranoia on aliens exist. It's too busy with tired complaints about kiddie romance, girls are such a drag, I need a girl that I can train, and living at home with mom. But the title does capture the band's comic sensibility, which ranges from that of a frustrated teenage male to that of his little brother.
It's pretty good.
As if their lyrics were not enough, the band was tagged as misogynist around this time, in part for urging female fans to display their breasts during concerts. No one's going to confuse Blink-182's music with X or even Green Day, but the lyrics make the early Beastie Boys seem like Oscar Wilde.
That's a good review. Like, it's like some savage, spicy, but it's like
it's spicy.
And obviously, you know, with a sort of functional understanding of punk as well.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think, and I just want you to now read, sort of starting with these images. That the last bit of the review is really important, where it gets into sort of the nursing aspect.
Right. So they're sort of coming out of a paragraph where they're describing the appearance of the nurse in the "What's My Age Again" video and the nudity. So
and then her being on the back cover holding up a big old syringe, which they show the back cover as well.
Yeah. These images seem to combine the classic naughty nurse stereotype with a more malevolent, ratchet-like image. What does that mean?
I don't know. It's one of their theories. I think we'll all learn later. Don't worry about it.
Like Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
So sorry. These images seem to combine the classic naughty nurse stereotype with a more malevolent, ratchet-like image as Janine prepares to do something to the almost naked boys that they may like and or not like, whether giving them enemas or doing something with that big needle, which would play no role in a real enema procedure. These could be read as a half-baked comment on our powerful state, which arguably seduces people with assurances that it has their best interests at heart so it can more easily violate them, whether through phallic healthcare devices, pornography, or record industry marketing. The dominant colors of the photos and all the CDs are all American red, white, and blue. The inside design also includes a variety of somewhat ominous healthcare symbols. But that still leaves a nurse as the symbol of a hostile system of control, when historically, nursing has been more about struggling to overcome powerful forces that threaten nurses and their patients. And a less thoughtful analysis, to which some of the band's young fans might just fall prey, could miss the nuances and simply see a porn star playing a hot nurse. Not exactly a helpful image during the current nursing crisis. Personally, I think Janine's big scary syringe is full of adulthood. This review is like amazing. This is
so interesting. And so, like, normally I think most people would just be like, oh, that was such a good link, I'm going to talk about it on the pod. But I decided to go one step further and contact Sandy and Harry Summers and have a nice little talk about representations of nursing in the media, including an actual feud that they had with Jack White. So,
what?
Yeah, it's amazing. So listen on to hear me talk to Sandy and Harry Summers about nursing and like misogyny and society. It's very interesting. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks
you for having us, Josiah.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, this is sort of a out of left field guest for us, but I was actually just looking for a decent scan of the album cover of Enema of the State, and then I stumbled across truthaboutnursing.org. So maybe tell me a little bit about your website and what you guys are sort of, what your message is.
Well, it's the website for our nonprofit organization called The Truth About Nursing, and we work to improve public understanding of the nursing profession by challenging media stereotypes. And we do this because nursing is weakened. It's weakened because of negative media, just a lack of understanding. So because of this misunderstanding, people don't fund it as well as it should. Nursing practice, clinical research, and residencies, education, they don't get the funding they need or deserve. And so because of that, nursing is weakened. And when it's weakened, we are not strong enough to save the lives that we need to, that we could. if more resources were invested in nursing. And this is not just a U.S. thing; it's a global problem. The media stereotypes are global. The lack of funding going into nursing is global. So if people understood what nurses can do to save lives, they would invest more and allow us to save more lives. But the media insists on portraying nurses as the underlings of physicians when they are instead autonomous professionals. They insist on portraying nurses as unskilled when in fact, we're college educated science professionals. And the other there's three big stereotypes. The last, not least one, is the naughty nurse, which suggests that nurses are all about just providing sexual services. So 72% of nurses are sexually harassed in the workplace. They're asked for sexual favors. They're grabbed and they're groped, and they're portrayed as in-hospital prostitutes. When nobody who goes to college and pursues a serious profession really wants to be thought of as a sex object and treated so poorly, sexually assaulted. This naughty nurse media stereotype is a big reason, perhaps the only reason, that nurses are thought of this way, is just perpetuating the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's so opposite of any experience I've ever had of going to a hospital where a nurse, it's hard to even imagine. Like, it's such a chaotic environment where where anyone could find any sort of like eroticism in that is absurd in real life.
Yeah, well, somehow people do.
But okay, so let's rewind a little bit, because where did this stereotype originate?
Well, Florence Nightingale was battling some of these issues back in the mid 1800s, that before she professionalized the profession and insisted all the nurses wear nun-like outfits. There was this, it seemed that a lot of the people who were nurses were people who had once been prostitutes and were possibly no longer desirable as prostitutes, so they went into nursing. So anyway, but she saw it as a serious science to be pursued, and worked to professionalize it, in part by working very hard to fight against the naughty nurse stereotype. So, and that worked well for a long time. But in the 60s, nurses started, all women started wearing dresses and skirts that were much shorter, and then it seems to have started in the 60s.
Yeah, I think also the sexual revolution led to a lot of changes globally, really, but in the 60s. And so with the sort of expanded concepts of sexuality and what could be portrayed in the media, unfortunately, one thing that happened was that female nurses came to be more associated with explicit sexuality in the media. And it's really continued in different ways since then. I mean, even recently, you can still see it. It remains a staple of pornography. So I think it grew out of that. As women had more choices in life and many could become physicians, I think nurses came to be seen as more sort of backwards or backwater, and people who didn't get as much respect. So I think it relates to a lot of complicated changes in society since the 1960s.
Right. And then, I mean, this album cover is from 1999, and I do want to dig into this review and the album cover a little bit in a second, but what about in contemporary society? Is it still the same way? Are nurses still portrayed in this way? Because it's something that is so common, probably, that I just don't even notice it.
Oh, it seems that 1999 is contemporary enough, but anyway, it hasn't really decreased that much. Actually, in the mid zeros, we had several successes in ability to ask advertisers to stop using the naughty nurse, and Christina Aguilera had one for Skechers.
Right, she was promoting Skechers, the shoe.
Yeah,
running
as, in a
shoes.
naughty nurse, and they removed that ad because of our campaign. You know, there's some other advertisers you probably wouldn't know of, Constellation Beverages and a milk company in Canada. What was that called? It was on the East Coast in
I don't
Canada.
know.
So, and the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario helped us with that campaign, and so they stopped using the naughty nurse. And also in Canada, the Coors Brewing had these like trauma festivals where usually men would jump motorcycles over school buses, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so they had so, you know, I don't know.
It was like a trauma tour, right? Where they
Yeah.
had like extreme sports events. I mean, just stepping back, it's often, I mean, there's certain types of products that are more likely to have the naughty nurse use to sell them. Alcohol is an obvious one. But anything that's sort of male oriented, like male body spray, things like that.
Yeah, Tag body spray.
Yeah. So certain types of products tend to still have naughty nurses sometimes used. Do you think it's gotten better?
You know, advertisers, I think they got the message in late zeros, you know, to some extent. And there have been many fewer, you know, big advertisements we have had to challenge. Now, the naughty nurse stereotype exists widely on the internet. You know, if you type in nurse, you get all sorts of naughty nurse images.
Yeah, I could imagine even like stock photos and stuff must be full of naughty
Yes.
nurses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it still appears in other types of media. I mean,
Television.
yeah, it still appears on television,
Whitney.
music videos,
Yeah.
obviously. So
It's still there. It's just, I think we made a little dent in it in the late zeros, but we still have a lot of work to do.
But I mean, if you look at our website has fewer reviews from the last few years, and I'm not sure if that's a result of it declining or us just turning our attention to other stuff. But there's actually the band Headley. I think we have a review of their video from a few years ago. I believe that's a Canadian band, maybe not among the most popular, but they had a video that 2014, yeah, they had a video that had a fairly mild naughty nurse in it, but it's like a stock figure, you know.
Yeah, interestingly enough, because we both live in Canada, you should Google Headley after this.
We know that, and that's why we're mentioning it. But it's not like Canada is not like, you know, the main offender or anything. We just are mentioning.
Yeah, for sure. But I was just gonna say the singer of Headley is currently awaiting trial for 3 counts of sexual assault, and there's multiple other allegations. It's kind of a huge scandal in Canada right now. So it's interesting that it appears on your thing, but I think in general, yeah, it's hard to know if these things have changed or not. The other thing I wanted to ask you culturally quickly, this is such an interesting topic that I've never realized was so fascinating to me. But how about in terms of Halloween costumes?
Oh, it has gotten worse over the past 10 years since all Halloween costumes have become sexualized. It didn't used to be that way 10 or maybe 15 years ago. I'm not exactly sure of the date, but now it's very difficult for a female to find a costume that's not sexualized. Sexualized fairies and sexualized Red Riding Hood and like everything.
Yeah,
is
but which
sexy.
we really don't like focus on. I mean, we're not really about objecting to sexuality, right? We're about objecting to sexuality being associated with the profession of nursing in the workplace. So maybe that does add to it, but that's an important distinction because a lot of people have perceived us, or shall we say, put us in the box of, oh, you're just prudes objecting to sexuality.
We don't object to sexuality. Go ahead and have sex. Please have fun.
I mean, like associating your job with sexuality. That like, I mean, leaving aside sex work, which is a whole other thing, but I mean, for nursing, it's its own thing. It's not really about that, and that can lead to lots of problems for nurses in the workplace when they're trying to do their jobs, and people do harass them. People do make these comments, you know, so assault them.
And but to finish the thought on Halloween costumes, even though all female costumes now are sexualized, before that happened, there was the naughty nurse costume. So that has been around since, we don't actually know when, probably the 60s, but we don't know when naughty nurse costume began, but now it's not alone in its sexualization. But if somebody has to choose a sexy Halloween costume, we wish they would not choose the nurse.
Yeah, and it has been something we've gone after and that we've commented on, and urged people to consider if they could do something else. But I mean, and that links into the mainstream media too, like the Saw films. I don't know if you're familiar with those. The
I haven't
horror
seen
films.
them, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean they're promoted through this interesting sort of intersection of like naughty nurse imagery that's also scary, and they tend to release the films in the series around Halloween, and they have blood drives. So it's an interesting mix of them trying to do good stuff with blood drives, but promoting it with often kind of like naughty nurse imagery, or what we've come to call the naughty axe, which is kind of a combination of the naughty nurse and the battle axe, which, looking at the Blink-182 cover, actually Janine is also arguably in that category because there's something menacing about her as well, right?
Yeah. So what is the thing that you call the battle axe? What does that mean?
Oh, a sadistic nurse who is out to hurt you, possibly rape you with an enema. Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that's the quintessential battle axe, where she psychologically tortured the Jack Nicholson character McMurphy until she, basically raped his brain with a lobotomy. She put in motion the bureaucratic process in which he got a lobotomy, and that was all her. So,
and she drove the younger character to kill himself, if I recall, right?
Oh,
the
right.
Billy character, right? And it was very much linked to sexuality as well. But
she stifled sexuality.
Yeah, and so you can see it run through later, like sort of prominent characters, like in Stephen King's Misery.
Right.
Yeah, the Kathy Bates character there she was a nurse, and she tortured the male character. I forgot his name.
So do you think some of that stuff is because of people's fear of visiting the doctor?
Yeah.
Well, fear of visiting the nurse.
Right.
Hospitals, when they males are especially feel so vulnerable, and then they encounter these females who have all this power. Who would have thought a woman would have power? Oh my God! What are we gonna do? What is she gonna do to me? She's gonna rape me. I mean,
Yeah, and also it's just that the care can be intimate, right? I mean, Nightingale was facing this from day one. Here's something that women can do outside the home, but it's kind of scary because it's intimate. How am I going to make this okay with society to have women performing intimate, necessary work to improve health with men, who are, of course, at times naked? I mean, because that's in a hospital, you're not well, and you need people to help you do basic, intimate stuff. So that's something, I think you're exactly right. It relates to male fears, and that could manifest in a number of like female stereotypes, from like the scary battle axe to the sexuality, right, of the naughty nurse.
Right. Like, the men are asking, why are these women coming to touch my genitals? Either here because they want to have sex with me, or they're here because they're going to rape me. So that nurses get put in those two different boxes, and sometimes, the naughty axe is, I guess, some sort of S&M fantasy.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah. So let's get into the review. And I first of all want to say, like, I'm a music writer. That's my job. And this is a surprisingly very well written review in terms of, I love the musical criticisms, and then also adding in this like nursing thing. It's such a unique piece of writing. So I really liked it a lot.
That's all Harry. Give him credit for that.
Yeah. Thanks. I try to engender reactions from people like you in part. I mean, mostly we're writing for nurses in the media, but to the extent somebody who's like a music professional critic person finds it at least amusing, that's good, because I want to engage you too, and all your fans and people who I guess are fans of the band. Even though obviously it's not the most positive review, but I tried to be as fair as I could.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've come to the conclusion that as massive fans of the band who are doing this project, we have the right to be critical of them because we've dedicated this much time to them. We've got to admit the bad with the good. But we've noticed that a lot of stuff from this era has really aged very badly in terms of like societal progress, and it's very misogynistic when you look back at it. But notably, first of all, I want to talk about your intro because I think it's so funny that you say no one's going to confuse Blink-182's music with X or even Green Day. I mean, you must have some punk
Sorry.
chops.
What is it?
You must have some punk chops or something to be able to parse that. This is
Yeah,
clear.
I was thinking, I think even though I wrote this like 15 years ago or whatever, or maybe more, I don't know what the date
Yeah,
of the review is.
2003.
Yeah, 15 years ago. I mean, I was thinking about California bands that had punk-oriented California bands that had achieved some level of visibility. Obviously, X not so much as Blink-182, but it's interesting when you think about these bands, all California, but those three bands from different parts of California. And I wouldn't want to generalize about different parts of the state, but that's what I was sort of thinking of.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway.
Yeah. So you offer a very, I think, fair criticism of the album, although some of the juvenile things I think is what people love about it. But then I love that you pointed out that like this idea that the album title is literally interpreted in the photo of an enema, but then you guys point out like an enema would not look like this in a medical office.
Well, and yeah, the front cover. Well, she would be putting on a glove for an enema. She wouldn't have her red bra exposed, or the garters, or the red high heels, and right, and they would not be sitting down facing her. And
But what about the syringe, right?
the
That was
syringe is like,
yeah.
you don't use a syringe with a needle on it like that. It's usually a very blunt tube.
It's like she's going to
not
inject.
pointy.
So she's not going to inject the enema. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you don't inject it with a syringe like that. Let's see, is there a needle on that? I don't have a high enough resolution. Yeah, there's an enormous needle on that. That's ridiculous. Yeah, you would never use a needle for an enema.
I think, at least comedy-wise, I do find it funny that Tom DeLonge, the guy in the middle's face, is kind of terrified of the whole situation. But I guess that plays into the other stereotype you were talking about of that she's a sort of a punisher.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it looks like obviously they're all in on the joke, and I think that applies to the band in general. I know they're all in on the joke, but still, I mean, it will kind of reinforce these ideas which we find unhelpful.
Well, we've talked about that a lot of how they can be in on the joke and they can be employing irony and whatnot, but their audience, especially if it's young kids who haven't formed their brain yet, they can't parse sarcasm or irony or these kinds of more adult concepts.
Yeah, they probably do think it would look like this to have an enema.
Yeah, or just that it's fun to think of nurses and women that way, right? I mean, I couldn't have said it better. So.
And then towards the end, you do sort of try to take some metaphor from this. And it's interesting that you point out, I've never thought about before how the dominant colors of the album are the American red, white, and blue. So kind of what were you trying to say there in terms of the colors and sort of what it's saying about American healthcare?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's fully developed, but I think you could probably make some argument that it's. I think that because I do think they have a level of awareness and on the jokeness, and there's a certain irony in what they're doing. I think they may be implying something about some underlying decadence, some underlying flaws in the system of their country. Like I don't know how much they were really thinking about it consciously, but I mean there are all those healthcare symbols right in the album package.
Yeah.
So I mean maybe kind of getting back to Nurse Ratched, and maybe they're thinking about the sort of system. We live in a larger system, and part of that system may include methods of control and directing us in certain directions. And it may seem attractive, like Janine, but there may be an undercurrent of threat there. And so, I mean, maybe it would be overreading it to say they're trying to warn us, they're trying to warn us. Not everything that looks attractive is actually good for you. But you know, maybe.
It's very generous. Yeah, I mean, it's so cool how you can. We talk about this a lot as well, like the death of the artist and how things are open to interpretation. You can find new meaning in things that were probably just like, I like cleavage, let's do this.
Yes, I think that's right. And even if right, I mean, the band members could say, well, here's what I meant, and it was all about breasts, or here's what I meant, and it was a very subtle critique of the American political and cultural system, especially as expressed through healthcare symbols, because that's what I was really thinking about at the time. My cousin was sick, but none of that really matters, because what matters is what the kid who just bought the CD thinks.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and when we do reviews, that's really what I think we're focusing on. How is this likely to be understood by the great mass of people? Not necessarily the best informed people, although that's relevant. I mean, it's not irrelevant what the band thinks, right? But that's not controlling. Like we have interactions with Hollywood, and they're all like, "Oh, I never meant to disrespect nurses. My mom's a nurse," right? We've heard that like 100 times. It's like, yes, but your product, even through just negligence, your product is likely to have this effect, right? That's what we're interested in. So.
Wow. So someone in Hollywood has created a sexy nurse character because their mom is a nurse. It sounds very Freudian or something.
No, it's not necessarily a nurse. It could just be a handmaiden nurse.
Right.
You know, kind of a mindless assistant who doesn't talk to patients, and basically their dialogue consists only of "right away, doctor."
So
Yeah,
Right.
yes,
So
doctor,
that-
right away, doctor.
You know, that's actually, in my opinion, that's at least as damaging as the naughty nurse, and in my personal opinion, more damaging, because of course there is an element of absurdity to the naughty nurse, but you know, so some people will disregard it. Perhaps you will disregard it because it's absurd. So at least consciously you're disregarding it. But when you see a persuasive Hollywood depiction of nursing in a, you know, ostensibly realistic show in which the nurse is nothing but an unskilled assistant, I think that's much more dangerous, much more damaging, because it seems more plausible.
So are there people in the entertainment industry that hate you guys?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't, you know, they probably think of us more as a gnat than than a bald eagle attacking their head. But
And,
Yeah.
and you mentioned like a lot of these things have
like
had
there's
real
people who
life.
think there's- Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say there's a very few people. I mean, we've had positive reactions to a few things, and like we had interactions with the people who created Nurse Jackie, and even though a lot of nurses didn't love that show, we thought it was, on balance, very good in portraying a strong, intelligent, really brilliant, autonomous nurse saving lives. So when we say positive things, people are more likely to, obviously, to like us. So.
Right. But
Oh, yeah,
but it sounds like
and
you've. Oh, sorry.
go ahead. Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it sounds like you've achieved some major like real life milestones through this activism here, and so it's clearly working. So I guess that I was gonna ask along the lines of the Nurse Jackie thing. Like, I mean, what have been some of the other big wins that you guys have had?
Oh man, it's hard to get Hollywood to do anything.
Right. We can't claim credit for the positive shows. I think
Yeah.
we're operating at the margins, but
ER did, you know, they had three major nurse characters: the Carol Hathaway at the beginning, Abby Lockhart in the middle, and Sam Taggart at the end. And we did harass. We started getting involved with them in the middle, like 2002, 3, and then several years later, one of the things we asked them to do was have a nurse go to graduate school in nursing, because nurses are 100 times more likely to go to graduate school in nursing than they are in medicine. Yet the first two nurse characters, Carol Hathaway aspired to be a physician, Abby Lockhart became a physician. And so we asked them to send one of their nurses to graduate school. And in the final season, Sam Taggart did go to nurse anesthetist school, and it showed a lot of you know, knowledge and expertise. So yeah, we kind of take credit for that. But you know, since then, Grey's Anatomy is awful. They won't listen to a thing we say, and they won't talk to us on. You know, we have these year-end awards, these 10 worst media depictions of the year awards, And routinely, Grey's Anatomy gets on the 10 worst, and we send them. We print out certificates and actually send them to Grey's Anatomy. And so one of their advisors was at this conference in DC several years ago, and someone challenged them, like, what about your depiction of nursing? It's awful. And this advisor said, oh, actually, this nursing group has been sending us awards. Did you read? It says
That is
right. So I don't know if they were really clever and just like,
sly.
Half the suited them, or whether they just hadn't even looked at it closely enough. Like some assistant said, oh yeah, this nursing group has sent us another award. Huh, isn't that interesting? And that was all they knew.
Have you guys seen the show Children's Hospital?
Oh, we try to not do soap operas because we don't have enough staff, honestly.
Oh, well,
this is Rob Corddry's show, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well,
yeah, we've seen it, but we haven't followed it closely. What's your perception of that?
I was just curious what you would think, but I assume it's so absurd and ridiculous that it would be beyond analysis.
Beyond analysis? Yeah, I my memory of it is that, I mean, there are some shows that kind of go after everyone, go after every profession, and no one looks good. I mean, the Getting On, that show, the UK show, and there was an HBO remake of it as well.
Okay.
And about a geriatric care facility. And it was, kind of depressing. No one came off great. But there can be a problem when those shows, I mean, it may be that they're stereotyping physicians and it's not good for them. But if they're also stereotyping nurses, which I think there might have been some of in that show, in Corddry's show, that's also unhelpful. Even if you could say, oh, well, the show goes after everyone. It's still.
Yeah, that's sort of a cop-out excuse, I think, when people say, oh, we go after everyone. It's like, well, the character of Pooh is still kind of racist or whatever.
Not everyone's similarly situated. I mean, if you can go after billionaires and make fun of them, but like they're not similarly situated to Apu. Yeah.
How to say that? They used to say, oh, well, we go after everyone on the house. He's, mean to everyone. But he was mean to nurses in a way that suggested they had no brain, no skill, no autonomy. He argued with the fellow physicians as equals or as slightly sub-equals, but they were still people who you could go back and forth with. Nurses you could never go back and forth with on house. They were just there to be belittled and degraded and mocked and
Yeah, with a limited exception, with one or two limited exceptions, but very, very few. I wanted to make a point about the awards. There are people who take our awards relatively seriously, or at least they pay close attention to what they say, and that's Jack White. He said, right? So
Really?
we didn't single out Blink-152, to give a negative review. If you look at our reviews, I mean, we also gave the White Stripes song "The Nurse" an equally negative review, even though, of course, Jack White is perhaps a figure that's gotten more like media respect and social respect. We sent him an award because, I mean,
a worst of award.
Yeah, worst of award. And our view of his song was that even though it was, ostensibly a thoughtful Jack White song, it was using a lot of nursing imagery. Complain about a lover, it appeared. I mean, he was a little vague and ambiguous, but the way it seemed was like basically this person who was supposed to be tending to him and treat him, well, was actually rubbing salt in his wounds and doing bad stuff. And we had a pretty negative reaction to the way that imagery was being linked together. So we sent him one of these awards. And now mostly people ignore our awards, but not Jack White. He sent us a counter award. Sandy, like, what was it? The failure to appreciate literature award, or the poetry, wasn't it? Do you have it here somewhere? I think it's, if we have it, I don't know where it is, but it was like the poetical misunderstanding award.
Metaphor. He didn't know. He didn't think we understood how to use the metaphor.
Like we didn't understand that he wasn't talking about an actual nurse. Like he was using nursing as a sort of image to, as a metaphor. It's great. Yeah, here it is. Okay.
Metaphorical Ignorance Award.
Metaphorical Ignorance Award to Sandy Summers. And he created it. And He did it on behalf of the Center for Lyrical Advocacy. Yeah, and we have this autograph now.
Oh my
So
god.
this might be worth money because he mimicked the certificate that Sandy created for our works.
That is
but
hilarious.
it is kind of hilarious because, I mean, really, it was his use of metaphor we were objecting to. We understood very well what he was doing, and the problem is that when you use nursing as a metaphor for negative female traits, that's unhelpful. You know? So, I mean, Jack's doing very well as a rock star. So that's good, because as a critic, I'm not so sure.
Well, I guess that was what I wanted to ask you guys, because obviously these stereotypes are dangerous, and as you mentioned earlier, like the naughty nurse has resulted in real life rise in sexual harassment and assault. But what about outside of stereotypes, when a portrayal of a nurse is just perhaps not realistic? Like, for example, legal TV shows, if it was actually realistic, it would be so boring to watch. So what about in terms of just making it interesting or colorful as an artist?
Well, that's something we hear from Hollywood all the time when we ask them to portray nursing accurately. They say, well, it's got to be dramatic. And so our response is, well, you have the physician characters doing all of the dramatic work that nurse characters do in real life. The physicians, they defibrillate when in real life nurses do that. They triage, they give IV medications and use the complicated ICU machinery. Nurses do all that. The psychosocial care, caring for someone's heart and soul. Nurses do that. And so when physicians perform all of the work that nurses do in real life, they get credit for it and instead of nursing. So if nurses were shown doing the real life work of nursing, perhaps we would get more funding for our clinical practice, education, and research.
Yeah, I think 15 or 20 years ago, we had to kind of struggle for examples of what we're talking about in isolated episodes of ER or Scrubs, maybe, which there were, a few episodes of those shows that were pretty good for nursing, and they would show some of what Sandy was just describing. But since then, we can point to Nurse Jackie and Call the Midwife, very different shows, but both of which have shown, over the course of years, a lot of examples of nurses acting with great skill and autonomy and making a real difference. So that's the answer.
Right. I'm just I'm imagining what the album cover for Enema of the State would look like if it was someone just sort of in normal nursing clothes with no makeup and a sort of drab hospital lighting holding up an actual enema. And I think that would be more of a bleak image, but maybe it would be better.
It would be the straight battle axe instead of the nodding axe.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of ways to go. I don't know. I guess it would be a nurse who would be engaged in this.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to show the nurse, right? I mean, there's lots of ways to go with that. Even if you wanted to keep that image.
Have the Capitol building giving the enema. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to recast things. I'm personally never totally comfortable with the idea that people should just undo some media they've done. That doesn't have. I'd like people to maybe make some different choices, but I feel like we do that all the time on issues like race and gender, or we should, right? Make different choices about what we choose to express. So
we did get Dos Equis. Heineken owns Dos Equis. They had an ad where those ads, the most interesting man in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, he fights bears, and what else does he do? He does also just dangerous things, and he's so sexy. He's older, and so in one he is at a Chinese wedding bench pressing nurses. Yeah, there's a chair on either side of him in which a nurse sits, and he's bench pressing them. They're just really quirky. They're adorable ads. So we called Heineken and asked them to not have the nurses be there. So they worked with us on this, and they kept their ad, but they changed the outfits of the women so that instead of white dresses and caps, they digitally took them away frame by frame. They removed the caps and changed the dresses to one orange, one red. So they're no longer nurses. And I was thrilled because, I love the ads. And we didn't have to ask them to kill their, their product. It was a win-win.
Right. Oh, that's cool. Well,
Yeah, it's hard to make that happen. Usually, it's just too flawed.
yeah. But I wanted to also quickly talk about because on an opposite end, but something that's kind of so before Enema of the State came out, Blink-182 had an album called Dude Ranch, which we've been analyzing closely, and we kind of think the album title might have sort of a double meaning pun, but that's besides the point. But either way, Sonic Youth, who are sort of the opposite kind of band, have a song called Dude Ranch Nurse on their album Nurse. So that album's been popping up like crazy lately anyways. But either way, you guys were very pleased with their portrayal of nursing on this album.
We were more pleased. I mean, that song is the one that most explicitly addresses nursing on the album. But that whole album package, just as Blink-182's album package has all the healthcare themes, the Sonic Youth album package is very much linked with Richard Prince's paintings. I don't know if you're familiar with his nurse paintings. But so are you familiar with him?
I know the name, but I haven't actually seen those paintings.
Right. Well, there's some on our site, and if you Google it, you can easily find them. He did a series of paintings that were based on sort of pulp. Well, some of them are based on like Cherry Ames novels, and I think others maybe on pulp novels from several decades before.
I think mostly pulp.
Yeah, and about nurses, and he took the images and sometimes the titles from these sort of cheesy novels and made paintings around them. And often he presented the nurses, kind of surrounded by these like very bold and somewhat scary colors, and often with these white globs over part of their faces, which looked like masks. Yeah, like masks.
And often they were bleeding around the masks or from some part of their body. Usually their mouths. But to me, it's that I don't like to see nurses looking awful. But we're not about some angelic portrayal of nursing. More, we're about trying to get people to think about nursing. And I don't know if it was intentional, but I thought the masks suggested that nurses are gagged. Nurses are largely silent. They don't speak up about the things that, hurt their profession or hurt their patients. And so, I think that's kind of accurate that nurses are gagged. And also they're bleeding. They're bleeding because they're gagged. We are suffering. It's a dying profession. These various forces in society keep taking away parts of nursing they find valuable until nursing barely exists anymore. So, I think one thing that would help the nursing profession heal is to rip off the masks and start speaking. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would just say about that song, I think we didn't 100% love everything that was going on, I think, with that album and that song. We didn't give it the absolute highest rating, but it seemed to us much more thoughtful in kind of linking nursing and the sort of place that women are at generally and how society treats them, and maybe some of the decisions that some women themselves make. I think Kim Gordon's delivery of some of those lines sort of suggests this real ambivalence about the position of women and some of the choices that women. I mean, there's another song on that album about Mariah Carey, right? And at a not a high point in her career, I think, in the early 2000s. So I think that's what we saw in that song. But it is very ambiguous, right? Those lyrics are very ambiguous. Let nurse give you a shot. It's something to do.
Right.
It's, okay, what does that mean? I mean, it's like, are all women in relationships nurses? That's probably not a helpful way to think of things. But on the other hand, she's like not. It's not simple. I think she's sort of thinking about the different ways in which people relate, and it's sort of dangerous territory in terms of like what you can get into and what you can suggest about women in nursing by sort of equating them. Territory that I don't think Jack White handled very well. Here, I think it's much more ambiguous and thoughtful. And if you look at it, and if you look at all the lyrics, which we tried to, like I'm looking at it. Nobody knows the shape I'm in. I mean, that's Nurses in the Masks, right? So I don't know what it means, but I think it's interesting and more thoughtful, and that's why we liked it better.
Okay, cool. And so I guess just to sort of wrap things up, what are you kind of saying would be the ideal portrayal of a nurse in a piece of art?
Well, we've had trouble with two-dimensional, like still photos. Getting nursing portrayed accurately in a still photo is very hard because people come to the photo with their heads already full of so many stereotypes. So it's hard to undo them with just one snapshot. So moving pictures, or sound, when you have sufficient time to educate people, it's more effective, except for this one great Canadian advertisement for nurses about showing a guy in a bed and a nurse at his bedside, and the man, not the voiceover, but the little thought bubble above the guy's head says, "Oh, you think you're having a conversation about Jello, but your nurse just made 100 assessments on you." So it just takes some words in addition to a still photo, to educate people about nursing, I think.
That was like a nursing association.
Yeah, the British Columbia Nurses Union, I think, put that out. It was 20 years ago. It was great, though.
Interesting. Yeah. So just kind of not a cartoon portrayal, basically.
Yeah, I don't think we're not looking for an idealized version, or vision. I think that's again, that's kind of an easy box to put us in, but
flawed heroes are good.
Yeah, I mean, Nurse Jackie's another, again, is sort of an example. Here's somebody who's obviously an intelligent person with agency, who's, obviously offering something of great value in the professional workplace, but is also experiencing addiction and adultery and any number of other problems. And so, again, many nurses didn't like that. But that's the kind of portrayal that's going to show society that, nurses are, in some ways, like anyone else. I mean, they're three-dimensional people, but in the workplace, they have something of value to offer, just like the professions that have traditionally been portrayed as having something of value to offer, physicians and lawyers and other police officers, etc.
Yeah, she made astute assessments, courageous interventions, and she these bold plans for education and advocacy, and saved lives. And sometimes she tried advocacy, like this one great scene. I think it was in the first episode where she advocated for this patient with this idiot physician, Coop, actually, and he didn't listen to her. And the patient died, showing the audience that this is what happens when you don't listen to nurses. Mm-hmm. Patients die. Well, that was helpful to nursing, even though she was flawed, and so many nurses had problems with it. But we're like, if you can't take a flawed depiction, what would we have? An angel on TV? Nobody's going to watch an angel on TV. It'll watch for 1 minute and change the channel. Then we have no television show.
Yeah.
So if we roll with the punches with the flawed character, then we can use it as a vehicle to educate people about the value of nursing.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Call the Midwife also, obviously, I mean, that's a show that's much softer.
They're not so flawed.
Yeah, they're not so flawed. But it does get at some real issues, despite being kind of a soft focus. Most of the characters are basically decent and positive, so it's uplifting in that way. But they have their flaws, and they certainly face a lot of adversity, and that kind of depiction. But it doesn't have to be like, the nurse doesn't have to be a superstar if they just display some level of skill and strength, like good nurses do in real life. I mean, there's this Canadian show, actually, Mary Kills People, right? About a physician. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Maybe not a major show, but it's shown here too. And it's about this physician who helps people who are terminal to end their lives, which I guess is still illegal the way she does it anyway. But her, I guess, I don't want to call her a sidekick. That's not helpful to be.
She euthanizes people who are going to die anyway, just not right now.
Right.
The person who finds her client, shall we say, at the hospital they work at is a nurse. It's not a major role, but they do have a kind of bantering relationship in which the nurse expresses some level of autonomy and skill. Like when in their occasional interactions, the nurse displays knowledge of health conditions, and she's not just a meek assistant. And so even a very limited portrayal like that is of some use.
Right.
Even though the main character is a physician and it's mostly about her. So
For sure.
So small steps are helpful as well.
Awesome. So is there anything that you guys want to plug? I see that you have a book that looks very interesting, but you can talk about that or anything else that people might want to check out.
Well, thanks, you're kind. It's called Saving Lives, Why the Media's Portrayal of Nursing Puts Us All at Risk. And so, we talk about what nursing is, because most people don't know what it is, and why the media affects nursing and how it affects it. And we lay out the 6 major stereotypes. And then the final 2 chapters, we have a plan as how we could improve the situation of nursing, not just with nurses helping themselves, but with people like you. Thank you, Josiah. Reaching out to nurses and finding out what they really do and giving them airtime or space in their media products that will reach members of the public who wouldn't ordinarily think about nursing or read about it. A lot of people, when they see nurse in the title of anything, they shut their brains off. They don't listen. They think it does not pertain to them. So you've done us a great favor by interviewing us and getting word out to all your listeners that they can be part of the solution, to talk to their friends and family members about nursing and how it's much more than the media has led them to believe.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect place to call it a day. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. It's been great.